Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here today, and I'm honored to have the former governor of Wisconsin, Martin Schreiber, as our guest on Caregiving Insights. Having grown up in politics, Marty was well known for his passion for public service. When he was first elected to the Wisconsin State Senate in 1962, he was the youngest senator in state history at just 23 years old. In 1970, he was elected Wisconsin's 38th lieutenant governor. And then in 1977, Marty became governor of Wisconsin. And during that time, he received a Common Cause Award for open and honest government. After serving in the public sector for 16 years, Marty became a successful insurance executive and publisher before he started his own government relations firm in 1988. I have that as sort of the background because throughout this journey, his beloved wife, Elaine, was his rock and the glue that held the family together. As he shares in his book, which we will talk about, she cooked, she kept the house in order, she raised their children, held dinner parties, took them to chemotherapy, and so much more, including being a teacher when the family needed additional funds. As Marty shares in his book, and I quote, "She was as intelligent, kind, gracious, loving, understanding, self-sacrificing, and forgiving as any wife, mother, and grandmother could be." So if you don't know Marty's story, you may be wondering at this point, what can the former governor of Wisconsin provide to our Caregiving Insights audience and caregivers overall? And I'm going to answer that in one word, and that's insight. Around 2005, his beloved Elaine began to slip away from him as Alzheimer's set in. Roles changed, and Marty was her caregiver until she passed in 2022. Today, Marty is a respected author, speaker, whose focus is on raising awareness of Alzheimer's disease and the challenges faced by caregivers. His book, My Two Elaines, Learning, Coping, and Surviving as an Alzheimer's Caregiver, chronicles his journey with Elaine. The book has received national acclaim for its remarkable insights, humor, and no-nonsense advice. Having read it this past weekend, I agree 100%. It was incredibly moving. I think that's perhaps because in addition to Marty's vast wisdom, it's a beautiful love story, and that always moves me. Marty, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, Todd, thank you. And first of all, what a great introduction. I was beginning to believe a lot of the things you were saying about me, and that's so exciting. But so thank you very, very much. And I think before we go a step further, thank you for your determination, your passion, your courage, your time, your energy to try and help other caregivers just learn, cope, and survive. So thank you. It's a real honor for me to be with you and to share this time with you.
Thank you so much. There are many topics to address, and there are many takeaways from the book. We could spend hours, but we're going to condense it. And there's things in the book that you note that are called "What I Wish I'd Known," and we're going to touch on a bunch of those because I think that's really what's helpful to the viewers. So let's gently jump in. You noted in about 2005 is when you began to notice things changing with Elaine. For folks listening who may be wondering, how does Alzheimer's present itself? What are some of the things that changed?
Well, first of all, Alzheimer's and other kinds of challenges only happen to other people. And certainly not to me and not to Elaine. Our life was great. Things, grandkids were doing well. But what would happen is she was starting to get lost going to and from places she was going to and from for the last 10 years. She was a wonderful cook, and sometimes she would mess up her recipe so badly that she would cry. Sometimes she would tell me stories about what happened, and it never happened. And so those were the beginnings. And gosh, a great driver, and she would scratch the side of the car going in and out of the garage. So all of these things, sometimes individual, but then to a point where I knew that something just wasn't right. I knew that something just wasn't right.
So for you as a caregiver, and especially as a man, because I know you focus a lot on that in the book, the male side of that, what was your initial ability to handle everything?
Well, as I said, uh, this never happens. This always happens to other people. And so when the diagnosis was made, the doctor simply said, you know, I believe it's Alzheimer's early onset, um, and so you know, you just go along, and so never, and that's one of the reasons I wrote the book, because the 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 doctor really never gave me an understanding and an insight into what was ahead for me. You know, I was sort of like fumbling around in the dark and, you know, trying to do my best and trying to correct Elaine. And Elaine, it didn't happen on a Thursday, it happened on a Friday. And Elaine, it wasn't the Smiths, it was the Joneses. And Elaine, why did you put the car keys in the dishwasher? And Elaine, I told you 5 times that we're leaving at 10 o'clock in the morning. Why must you act? So all of those things were going on, and it started to sort of encapsulate me, and I just couldn't figure out, and so then I called the nurse over at the doctor's office. I said, hey, I said, you know, is there anything that I can do? And they said, well, they suggested a support group. Well, I was too strong and tough of a guy to ever want to go with other men, other people to sit in a support group. And I sort of thought, well, what is a support group going to do? I thought, well, they're going to sit around in a circle and we're going to play, can you top this? You know, this is what my loved one did. Well, let me tell you what my loved, and so I was not aware of the kind of toll that this disease takes on caregivers. And because of that, it made me frazzled and irrationally irritable and really a very, very bad, crummy, disappointing caregiver and life's partner.
Yeah, you write about that in the book. And in terms of support, in the what you wish you had known, how did you change that? How did you then switch?
It was gradual, and when I say gradual, I wish I'd have, you know, Eureka, or, you know, a hand on the wall saying, Martin, go to support groups. Martin, make sure you think about getting a counselor. Martin, make sure that you understand you've got to join Elaine's world. And you know, none of this was coming along in any kind of a desirable fashion. And and just finally it began to dawn on me, there's something more that I can be doing to help my wife get through this. Well, she kept a series of notes and diaries since she was diagnosed. And I went through those notes and diaries, and I want you to know that we had prayed together and we had cried together. But never did I understand the courage that it takes to be diagnosed with this illness and then to continue forward. And so here she is, like people with Alzheimer's, you know, they know that they're in the process of losing their memory. They have all kinds of worries and concern about what the future might be. And then the caregiver, me, the lifeline, is, why did it happen? Why it was a Thursday, not a Friday? It was the Smiths, it was the Joneses. Why did you put the car keys? So she was getting blamed for things that she never remembered having done. And so when I got those notes and journals, when I found them and I started to read them, it began to sink into me how much of a lifeline I was for her in her life, how important it was then for me to understand I've got to do a better job of understanding where she's at so we can do a better job of finding moments of joy.
I think that's really helpful for people to understand that, and that it is a journey. It's a gradual journey. You just don't flip a switch and you change your mindset or you change your heart space. You go through this, and going through this, one of the things that you wrote about in the book is depression. And we all know in general that men have more difficult time, one, identifying and naming it as such, and two, acknowledging to others and seeking help. What can you share with folks, and specifically men, that might be helpful?
I think one of the most important things I would want to share, and that is to ask for help means you are not giving up. And I want to drive that home as strongly as possible, because arrogant, self-centered, I can do it all, and it was wearing me down, and I was being a very poor caregiver for my wife, Elaine. And so I would want to tell any male caregiver, any caregiver, that let's assume hypothetically you're surrounded by an enemy and it appears that there is no chance of escape. Well, are you going to sit there and just get overrun? Or are you going to try and do the best out of what you have? And that would then be to go for help, to at least have some kind of hope and optimism that is there. And so to all my male friend caregivers, I would say, please understand, one of the most important, best things you can do for yourself and for your loved one is to ask for help. And know that asking for help is a sign that you are not giving up. Sometimes it takes courage to ask for help, but you know, I read, and I don't remember Todd, the author's name, but one of the points that the author said is, we can be in a situation where we can cry and scream and be distraught, or we can make a determination to say, all right, this is our situation. How can we make the best of it? And that then becomes so important. The question is, how can we make the best of it? And I contend that we can't beat this disease head on. You can't fight this Alzheimer's disease. So forget about that. But what I can do, I can make the determination to help my wife live her best life possible. And I can make a determination to help me live my best life possible. Those are both realizable goals. Todd, one point I want to get before we go on too far, and you mentioned depression, but also one of the things that I'm finding out as I meet with men after my talks and so forth, and that is what I call an unacknowledged grieving. And I had a friend who retired, and he died of a massive heart attack. Bang, gone. So sad and so tragic. Well, there was a funeral, and people came by to express their condolences and to offer their sympathy. And there was closure. Caregivers we have to realize that we are losing our loved one a little bit every day, as even if the life we're passing on, and that we are then in the process of grieving. We may not know it, but we've got to understand that we are, and then we have to confront it. And then we have to understand that one of the things that's going to be tough to come by is closure, because our loved one's mind may not be there, but our loved one is still there. But then to have the courage to understand what we're going through and to face it. Because what is this old saying, know thy enemy? And if we can understand it's that depression, and it's that grieving and need to keep ourselves healthy, now we've got something we can work towards. And that sometimes, it's hard to say it, but sometimes even that can be invigorating under the most dire of circumstances, because again, I'm moving forward. I'm doing something with hope.
That's really profound, and it actually leads me right into the next question that I was going to ask, which is, we know, as you just explaining, that surviving can be quite challenging for caregivers, especially Alzheimer's caregivers. Um, Figuratively and literally speaking, do you think there's a way to thrive? And how would you define that?
Well, I tell you, I guess I would say thriving is working towards discovering, making use of moments of joy. An example, when Elaine was diagnosed, the doctor says there were 4 things that we should do. Namenda and Aricept, those are the drugs that delay the symptoms. I don't know. We did it, but if it worked, I don't know. But anyway, so, and then there's socialization to make sure that we men, get out a little bit. And then there's walking, which is the best exercise for the brain. And then there's a glass of red wine every evening. Well, Elaine got 5 weeks ahead with the glass of red wine, but 4 weeks behind in the walking. But we would go for a walk. And I had my business understanding of a walk, which is a half hour, and we do it. So we're walking, and Elaine says, look at that bird, or Elaine, come on, we have to walk, or look at the beautiful flower. Can we have? And so what I began to understand is that in Elaine's world, to have a moment of joy in looking at a beautiful flower, or in seeing a bird, or in just holding hands and watching the leaves, blow across the lawn. Any one of those things, when you say thriving is helping our loved one live their best life possible. And how do we do that? We join their world.
Yes, and in the book you write about that, and it's very powerful and beautiful, and I hope people will get the book and read. It's very helpful. And I want to move on to, let's call it a tactical topic, because you talk about this, and it's a difficult one, which is therapeutic fibbing and redirecting. And you wrote about this being such an important part of loving someone with Alzheimer's. Can you tell us the why and how, and perhaps give examples?
Elaine asked me once, how are my parents? I said, well, they're both dead. The shock on her face when she realized she didn't say goodbye to her parents, or much less attend the funeral, and I promised myself I'm never going to put her through that again. And so the next time she asked me, how are my parents? Oh, I said, your mom likes working at church. She's doing fine. Your dad is enjoying she said, that makes me feel so happy, And so that's what I call therapeutic fibbing. Now, there are 2 things that I think people should understand about therapeutic fibbing as far as my situation is concerned. But I tried therapeutic fibbing the first year I was married, and that does not work so good. The second is, and not everyone believes this, Todd, but the second point of this is, when Moses went up to Mount Sinai and brought down the 10 commandments, the 2 tablets of stone, well, the front part were written in a type of ancient kind of language, which we could not decipher unless we were so studied in this. But I was there. I was there when Moses brought down and on the other side of these tablets, written in American English, is therapeutic fibbing is good, therapeutic fibbing is important, and sometimes therapeutic fibbing may make a really positive difference in the life of our loved one. So that the reason that I bring that up is we know that we're not supposed to lie, and we know that we would never want to mislead our loved one. But by the same token, when it comes time to helping our loved one live their best life possible, therapeutic fibbing becomes pretty important. One other aspect that goes along with therapeutic fibbing, and that is, Elaine spent roughly 8 years in assisted living memory care after I understood I couldn't do any more for her. But so we're eating lunch in assisted living memory care, and she starts to cry. And I said, Elaine, why are you crying? Well, she says, I'm beginning to love you more than my husband. And well, I didn't ask her what's wrong with your turkey husband. I didn't ask her that. But here is what that meant to me. It meant that she did not have to know my name in order for our hearts to touch. I try and have caregivers understand that it's not important. I mean, first of all, it is a very difficult situation when when our loved one no longer remembers our name or may no longer remember who we are. No question about that. But just because they don't know our name, and just because they may not know who we are at the moment or at any point, that does not stop our souls from touching. Our souls and our hearts can touch by a hug, by the holding of hands, by the singing of songs, uh, by just being together, by a smile. The name of my book is My Two Elaines. So the first Elaine, of course, was this woman, the girl that I fell in love with when I was 14 years old, and then, of course, married. And then the second Elaine begins with her getting lost and so forth. Well, but there were other Elaines too. There was the Elaine who could no longer walk, and then there was the Elaine who was confined to a wheelchair, and then there was the Elaine who could no longer talk, and then there was the Elaine who could no longer recognize me. So there were many Elaines. And so I know how hard it is for a caregiver to go through all of this. But by the same token, Todd, you asked the question, is there an opportunity or is there a way to survive through this all? And I think that there is, because of the incremental kinds of things that might happen. A smile from our loved one, an acknowledgement, knowing that we're giving comfort by holding a hand. And yes, I wish I would have never had to have gone through this, and I wish that no caregiver ever would have to be a caregiver. But it's there, and what can we do? We try and do the best we can and helping our loved one live their best life possible.
Yeah, what you just shared was something that I remember from the book, and I think it's what you're talking about is mood sharing, and how important it is to share their mood, and it brings you closer when you do that. And I assume that's what you were just speaking of, kind of the mood sharing.
Well, yeah, yes. I don't think I used the term mood sharing, which is a good one. I wish I would have used it. But we listened to a lot of Patsy Cline records, and then there was this sing along with Mitch Miller, who only older people like me will remember, but you know, singing songs together and just the music in and of itself, even if Elaine would not be singing, but we would, or I would just be singing, or none of us would be singing. But it's that mood sharing. It's joining the world of the person who now is. And I guess that mood sharing is a pretty good word. I'll have to write another book called Mood Sharing by Marty Schreiber, as suggested by Todd. That would be pretty good.
That's wonderful. I would love to be in that collaboration with you. You were just talking about the mood sharing and how difficult the challenges were, and you mentioned the first Elaine and this, you know, and second Elaine. That has to be one of the most difficult aspects of Alzheimer's. And how do you know when? How do you evolve from the caregiver of first Elaine to the caregiver of second Elaine, so to speak? And when is the right? How can you know there's a right time?
I don't think there is any kind of magical formula. I just, because the degrees progresses at different rates for different people. Well, I would say number one, you try and understand the disease, and I contend that if Alzheimer's is bad, ignorance of the disease is worse. And so the best, most important thing that we can understand, and that is the importance of this mood sharing or joining the world of this person who now is. And I think that's probably one of the most important things that that we can do, and that is to join their world. Because, Todd, as long as I tried to keep Elaine in my world, it didn't happen on a Thursday, it happened on a Friday in my world. It happened with the Joneses, not in my world. You put the keys in a dish, my world, and so forth. Once I got to the, and I wish it would have appeared to me in a vision that was so strong that I would have never forgotten it or never challenged it and so forth. But it took me a while to understand that, hey, this trying to keep Elaine with me, that's not going to happen. I've got to understand there's a second Elaine.
Yeah, it's an evolution like everything, but it's a gut-wrenching evolution, no question. I only have a few more things and we'll wrap up, but I wanted to touch on something that I thought was really beautifully integrated into the book. And that was, as you had mentioned earlier, these notes that Elaine wrote. And I just want to share with the audience snippets from a few of them and then have a follow-up. In 2009, Elaine wrote, "I can't go for a walk if I want to, or to the store alone. I used to appreciate him, what I thought was concern, but he holds me captive too much. I'm going to try to have a second opinion because I really don't think I have any problem." But then she went on 3 years later in April of 2012 and says, "Life is better than ever. Even my knee is cooperating and Marty too. He's finally relaxing more." And then the July 3rd, just a few months later after that, she wrote, "Life is good, and I plan to have it continue that way until my children tell me it's time for a nursing home," or something like that. This is realistic with what my Alzheimer's books say about my future. It's just they're very poignant.
I put those notes in there of Elaine's writings, so people would understand what a person is going through who is diagnosed with this disease, and to sort of indicate too that there's a challenge, because there's what I call the pivot. When Elaine was first diagnosed, as the writings that you read point out, she maybe sometimes didn't think she had Alzheimer's, and sometimes she felt more comfortable. Sometimes she was very angry with me. Sometimes she thought I was the greatest thing since sliced bread. But she sort of goes in and out, as this disease progresses, she's going in and out of the realization. And sometimes I think it's by the grace of God that the person actually pivots into their own world fully. And caregivers, we should not forget about the fact that all of a sudden this person, our loved one, all of a sudden is thinking they're being held captive, or thinking they're being taken advantage of only because we love and are trying to protect them. And so they have a very complex, challenged world. And I think, Todd, that also helped me be a better caregiver, to understand just what is going on in Elaine's life. And I would say that caregiving almost became easier at that point of pivot, where Elaine entered her own world. But then a caregiver also makes a pivot. And that's extremely difficult, but I think important. And that pivot is when we finally understand we have to let go of this person who once was, and then pivot into the life of this person who now is. Pray to God, no one would have to go through that, but it's there, and it's something we have to go through. And so here's the question: what are we going to do about it? Well, we're going to decide to make our loved one have their best life possible. And again, that's a doable thing, a realizable goal.
Before we say goodbye, I have one final thing to share, but I want to ask you, is there anything else that you'd like to share before I share my final thoughts?
Other than, again, to say thank you, other than to tell every caregiver, we know that it's a tough life. in essence, really a hero's job. I would say that, you know, we mentioned the term lifeline and what you truly are. And what we caregivers have to do is to make sure that we don't gnaw away at that lifeline to make it useless. If we're at a Caribbean cruise and you fall overboard and I throw you a lifeline and you grab it and we think you're going to be saved, but lo and behold, the lifeline breaks and you drown, now it's hopeless. Now you're done for. So how do we as caregivers fray or make that lifeline our loved ones help? We do it by not getting enough sleep. We do it by not getting enough exercise. We do it by not getting enough socialization. We do it by all of the things that we should be doing for a complete life. If we don't get enough sleep and if we don't take care of ourselves, we become irrationally irritable. We're not as capable of thinking or having the patience to take care of our loved one. If we don't ask for help, all of these things mount up. And I contend that the caregiver's poison, which is alcohol, comes to be a stronger factor. And again, so we caregivers have so much to handle with the disappearance of our loved one. And because we have so much to handle, it is even more important now that we take care of ourselves than almost any time before, because if we don't take care of ourselves, everything becomes magnified and so much worse and so much. So my advice and counsel to caregivers is know that it's a tough job. You're going to grieve. You're going to feel depressed. You're going to feel sad, sometimes hopeless, but we've got to make the best of it, and we can do the best of it by taking care of ourselves and helping our loved one, joining their world. And we can do our best.
Yeah, that was very well stated and resonated a lot for me as well. Marty, it's been an honor, truly, to spend this time with you. It's apparent to me, and I imagine everyone who meets you, reads your book, or watches this, that you're an incredibly kind and caring human being who loved both of your Elaines. And you know, I'm so glad you chose to share this love story in your book, and grateful you spent time with me today. And with all that in mind, I want to read one last note from Elaine. It was from 2015, and you shared it in the book. And she wrote, and it got me when I read it in the book. It said, "When I'm in heaven, I will always be smiling down at you with great love to the best man in the world." Indeed, Marty, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.